My name is Jeff DeBell, and I'm DNR's forest geneticist, and we're here today at Meridian Seed Orchard. Before we talk about the orchard, I thought I might just mention why this is important and how it fits into the bigger program. So DNR plants, in round numbers, maybe around 15,000 acres a year. And in addition to that, our nursery grows seedlings for small landowners who need to plant after timber harvest or fires on their property. So that takes a lot of seed. So it's our job to make sure there's enough seed in the freezer to supply the nursery when they're ready to grow those seedlings. We get that seed in two different ways. One is collecting it in the woods, and the other is producing it here. And the way we'd make that decision really is a matter of scale. For areas that don't have a lot of seed needs, maybe we don't own a lot of land there, or it's a species we don't plant very often, we just collect that in the woods because we can't afford to spend the money it takes to do a lot of testing on just a small amount of seed. But for areas where we own a lot of land and use a lot of seed, we can do things to ensure a better, more reliable supply of seed and also improve the quality of that seed. And by quality, I mean that it comes from a really good mix of parents. So there's really two parts of what we do here at the orchard. One is identifying really good seed parents, and the second is bringing good seed parents in and plant them together where they can cross-pollinate and we can manage them for reliable seed production. When we go out to find good parents, we start with trees in the woods. And in this program that started back in about the mid-1970s. So we have foresters go around and look for trees that seem to be healthy, have good stem straightness, good vigor, just overall look, better than average compared to the other trees around them. And then we can graft those into the seed orchard, and now we have a good group of parents that we think are better than average. But at this point, we really don't know if those trees are better than average because they're genetically better or just they happen to be growing on a particularly good microsite. So the way we get at that is we collect seed from those trees and we grow seedlings, keeping all the seedlings separate by parent, and then we'll plant those on sites around the state, and then we watch them. We'll measure, we'll keep track of mortality, watch any susceptibility to diseases or insects, measure growth, all those sorts of things. And then so we're essentially using the performance of the kids to tell us which parents are the best. Once we know that, we can cut out the parents that didn't really produce very good kids, and then we have a block of trees that are all really good trees in terms of the kind of seedlings they can produce. Once that's done, we can actually do another cycle of that, but this time we don't go back to the orchard. We'll just make controlled pollinations among some of those best trees to create additional variation, new combinations that we can send in another round of tests. And the person who's in charge of this side of the program is Stu Olszewski.
Hi, I'm Stu Olszewski. I've been working for Washington DNR for about 2.5 years. And here at the orchard, I oversee the Douglas fir testing program, where we breed Douglas fir and then test those progeny out in testing sites all across western Washington. So here I'm taking the pollen from one Douglas fir tree and I'm applying it to some flowers on this other tree, and this bag is a pollen exclusion bag, so it ensures that the only pollen that will pollinate these flowers is this pollen that I'm applying right here. And so what we've got is just a little paintbrush here that I'm gonna apply the pollen with. Just kind of dust over these flowers in the bag here. Each bag takes a few minutes, and I think we've got about 300 bags. It takes us about the whole month of April to get everything pollinated. And we pollinate a few times just to ensure that we're getting the flowers at the right moment when they're most receptive.
As we start to get data from the tests, we can make selections and plant new orchards that are really made up of the very best trees that we have. The way we do that is through grafting, and grafting is just a way to make copies of the trees that we want.
Hello, I'm Sean Smith. I'm the seed orchard manager at Meridian Seed Orchard, and I've been with the DNR for 10 years, in this position for 5. And my primary job responsibilities are overseeing seed production and tree stimulation to make sure we get the most improved seed for reforestation. So to establish new orchard blocks, we graft all our trees onto Cope's rootstock. And then we use a top cleft graft method. And so we take our scion material and cut a wedge into our rootstock and establish that in. And you want to match caliper, and then you wrap a rubber band around it and tar it. And after about 3 months, these rubber bands will start to fall off, and you can see the graft union all healed up. And this is what we want. This is the material that will now produce our seeds.
Once the trees are grafted and all healed up, we're ready to plant them in the fields, and we'll plant them in tree rows like you see here. These trees were planted out within the last 4 or 5 years, and they're just now getting into the stage where we can start managing them for cone production. In fact, you see this one is actually starting to flower already. These are little young cone flowers. Later in the year they'll turn pendant, where they're hang down and they'll look like regular Douglas fir cones like you used to, and you can see there's a little pollen on this tree as well. So once the trees get to this size, we can do things, apply horticultural techniques like girdling or injecting with plant hormones to really encourage flowering. And what we're trying to do is get as many of these trees in a flowering state as we can, so we can maximize seed production. Once we get the trees flowering, then we start managing pollen. And our purpose, our objective in managing pollen is to make sure that these little flowers get as much pollen in there as they can to maximize the amount of seed in every cone, and also to make sure that pollen is from these trees around them, not trees blowing in from outside the orchard. So that way we get high yields, a lot of seed from the cones, and it's the quality of the seed is such that both the mom and the dad are trees that we've selected for the orchard. One thing you'll notice in this orchard behind me is that the trees are all pretty close together and they're not very large. And this is different than most seed orchards you'll see. If you were to travel to eastern Washington and look in fruit orchards, what you'd see is a lot of closely spaced trees that don't get very big. And that's a change from traditional fruit orchard management. And we're trying to do the same thing here in conifers. And the same reasons that the fruit industry went that way apply to us. It's economically, it's more advantageous in terms of worker efficiency and safety. It's better. And the trick for us is these are different kinds of trees. We can't adapt fruit technology directly over, and we don't have dwarfing rootstocks and those sorts of things. So we have to figure out how to make this work in conifers. And that's what we've been doing over the past maybe 10 years. So to keep these trees small, we actually have what's essentially a very large hedge trimmer on a tractor, and we both top prune them and side prune them every few years. And then we've been adapting different kinds of tools that help us work on these trees and make that work efficient.
So with our Douglas fir crop, because we manage our canopies in more of a conventional orchard style like you'd see in fruit, we can manage our crops for pollination and make sure we get better seed set. So we use our pollen vacuum over here, and we can actually walk tree to tree and vacuum pollen off it. We use a cyclone separator and a collection right here. Then we can reapply our pollen we use compressed air and this wand right here, and we can actually pollinate each flower to make sure we have good seed set. To stimulate the trees for good crops, good flowering, is we girdle our trees, and we have these nifty little saws, and we'll do 2 kerf girdling cuts at the base of the tree to stress the tree to induce a crop. And then we also inject plant hormone called gibberellic acid, and we use this device where we can drill into the tree and then inject.
In traditional conifer seed orchards, the trees are widely spaced and they're very tall, and you don't really have access to the crop. And so it's just very cumbersome and difficult to get access to do any work. You're either on tall ladders or in mechanized lifts. And this kind of an orchard setup brings the crop down where you can reach it comfortably and efficiently. The testing that we do is done in cooperation with most of the other major forest landowners in Washington. We all share the costs as well as the results But our program here has the lead in actually implementing the program. So our staff makes the controlled pollinations, sets up the sites, maintains those sites, takes care of those trees and measures them over time. And then we send the data down to Oregon State for analysis, and which is of course then shared. So we really have a leadership role in that process. And working together so that we can afford to do all this is really helpful to us in having this, this repeating testing program where every few years we're getting new data. One thing that these repeated cycles of testing do for us is helps us kind of keep up with changes in climate. Now this may not fully protect us from big changes far in the future, but at least the results that we're using, the information that we're using about tree performance is reflecting tree performance in the most recent climate that we actually are experiencing. So that's one of the things that we do to try to make adjustments in our practices. One of the things I really like about this work is knowing that we're creating a strong foundation so that the trees on both state lands and on family forest owners' properties will be healthy long into the future.